Hello YouTube and welcome to my channel. If you've not been here before, if you have, then welcome back. We're getting a little bit of a late start on this project. We may end up carrying it over into tomorrow to try to get it all done. But we're going to start chopping the fenders on our Jeep. Now, there's a couple reasons behind this. One, the main reason is that in the spring I plan on doing a 2.5 to 3 inch lift and going to 35 1250s. So with that on road it would be fine, but when I go off road with the stock fender flares, I'm going to end up running into issues of the tires hitting the fender flares and rubbing. So I'm going to have to either replace them or cut them. Now, I've decided to go ahead and cut the stock fender flares or stock fenders for now. I may end up replacing them with a flat fender in the future. I may end up making my own, just depends. Or I may end up just rocking the chopped OEMs. But my thing is where I don't have the 35s on it right now. I'm not sure exactly how far it's going to stick out once I get the suspension and tire set up. So my thing is I would hate to spend anywhere from $300 to $700 for a set of aftermarket fenders, only to not be happy with them later on because they don't. They look good now, but when I go to my lift and tire setup, it's not what I want. So I will be showing you. We'll break this into a two-part series. Part 1 will be doing the front fenders. Part 2 will be doing the back. So if you just want to do the back or just want to do the front, you don't have to watch. I hope you can go directly to what you want. So far what we've got is masking tape, a Sharpie, and I'm going to use my Dremel. Just a word of advice: if you've not used one of these before, try to keep your speed low, because a rotary tool like this, when you're cutting plastic with it, has a tendency to melt through the plastic instead of cutting. Of course, I'm using this because it's handy and it's fairly easy to use. You can be pretty precise with your cuts with it. A jigsaw or just a hacksaw would work just as well. I mean, if you've got a small air rotary tool, you could probably use that to great effect. So this is by no means the only thing to use, but this is what I've chosen to go with. So what we're going to start with is move this out of the way. And basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my tape and I'm going to mask off one fender. And the idea behind masking everything first is to get an idea of where your lines are going to be, what it's going to look like. Now, for me, I want as much coverage as possible. So I'm going to probably run it just past here and take this outside piece off, that to bring it up, which would give me that much more clearance on up travel with my tires. Right now with your factory size tire, your tire when it comes up will actually tuck in behind this piece, and you don't really have much issue with clearance. But by cutting that off, when I do the 35s, instead of it hitting here, it'll be able to come all the ways up. So I'm going to start masking, and I'll bring you back here in a minute when I get everything lined up the way I want. But like I said, the idea behind masking it first is just so you can kind of see what it's going to look like. Right now is the time to play with. If you're not entirely sure what style you want to do, whether you want to leave as much of the fender as possible and do more of a full width, if you want to trim it back to do a skinny fender, if you want to, I'm going to come back past this roll to do a flat fender look, or if you want to leave some of the roll, or if you want to take, maybe if you want to play with your angles, maybe angle it back towards, maybe angle it as you come back the back side, angle it back in, you know, things like that. So on your first fender, play with your mask. When you're masking everything, is the time to play with your designs, because once you start cutting, you don't want to goof. So we'll start getting this this here masked off, and we'll be back in a minute. Okay, so I've got the other side masked off. I'm happy with the way it looks. I've got a basic design. So before I show you what it's going to look like, just a quick tip on running your tape straight. Figure out where you want your start point for your tape to be, and right now I'm just kind of eyeballing. I'll double check my measurements, but what you want to do is wrap it around and then run your whole length and kind of pull it a little tight, and you want to take and lay it down almost as one solid, almost all at once. So we've got to our curve, so I'm going to take from that curve, run it all the way out the length of my fender here. What I'm going to do is curve it around, and I'm going to take and try to line it up. And if I see this here's out a little bit, I'll bring it back, and you can take and kind of line it up as you lay it. So the way that I'm doing this is I'm running one solid piece all the ways around from my outside, and my cut will be to the outside of here. Then what I'm doing is I'm going to take and run me a piece from the I'm going to take and run my piece, and I want to catch it. I want to leave a little bit of that roll to it, so I want to come just under the roll. And on this one here, I'm wanting to cut the outside of my tape, so I'm going to use the bottom edge and take and try to determine about where I want it, and then put it down there. Now on the inside, I'm going to just wrap it around, and then I'm just going to take and tear it off. Now I've made me a nice straight edge, and I have a 90 where they intersect. Now, because I'm going to trim this with door trim, I want this to curve. So what I'm going to do is take me a short piece, and I'll take and stick it right along my piece that I already made. And what I'm going to do is just gently work it and curve it as I come around here, which I'll probably redo this side and possibly make a template for it off the other, so I can get my sides exactly matching. But now I've got my curve, and I can play with my tape till I get that curve exactly the way I want it. Then when I get everything masked off the way that I want, I can take me a pocket knife, and I can come right here around this curve and trace that out. Now I have a nice masked off. Now it's good. Now it's masked off. Now, and what I would suggest is just leave the tape on while you're working on it. And what that's going to do is that's going to give you a nice, good edge to work with. And what that's going to do is help protect back here, you know, That way if you wobble a little back or anything, you know, it's going to help protect what you don't want to cut. So now that I've showed you what I know about masking off, which this side, of course, you know, trying to do it for the camera, this side didn't look quite as nice. I'm pretty sure I've got my outside, but you can see where I've got my edge roll. But this is the side that I'm really happy with. You can see a nice straight line across. I ran my tape down to the inside. You can see what I'm talking about curving your tape to make a nice smooth curve, and then you can run it along this back side, and I've tucked it down here. So what I'm going to do is make me a template. You can either make a template or you can take measurements, which is what I may do, because I'm pretty sure that I've got this right. But I'm going to take some measurements from here up to here and then work to get the other side to match. And the thing is it doesn't have to match exactly perfect, but you want to get it as close as possible. So I'm going to take some measurements right quick, and I've got this one roughed in, but I'm going to make this side match my other side. Okay, so what I've done to get the sides to match is I took my tape measure and measured from here to the bottom of my tape on the inside, and then I measured 1.5 inches back, and then measured from here to the bottom of my tape. And then I came to this side, transferred my measurements, and I took, since this is going to get cut off anyways, I took my pocket knife and just kind of notched it at both of my points. And what that done is allowed me to take my tape and line the bottom of my tape up with my points and run this straight. Now, to make my curve match, I went and found me some wider painter's tape, and basically what I've done is overlaid that onto my curve for my side that I've worked out what I want for my design. And once I have that gives me my radius for my curve, and then I can take that and use that as a template. And then, there we go. Sorry about the camera work. I can basically just take and line that up on this side, and since I have the radius for my curve, and then just take my pocket knife and trace out to make both my curves match perfectly. So now I have both fenders taped, and it's time to start cutting. So something I almost forgot to mention is you want to disconnect your light back here, which, let's see here. Yep, it's just a pigtail on it. So I'll fight with that, but disconnect your light, that way you don't accidentally cut your wires and all that. I'm not going to reuse that, so I'm going to disconnect the pigtail, and the light's just going to be gone. Okay, so we've cut as far as we can with the fender on the Jeep. So now we're to the point where we actually need to remove it. Now, there's 5 of these 10mm bolts. One of them is hidden in the back side of the fender, way up, so if you go to tug on it and it don't come off after you remove the 4, there's a 5th one that's hidden. You can't really see it. You just kind of got to feel for it. So once you get those 5 bolts out, the only thing that's holding it on right now is the clips. So I should be able to just get a hold of it, and this is going to sound really bad, but you just grab a hold of it and pop the fender off. So there we have it. We have our fender and inner fender pulled out. We'll go ahead and finish our cut on this inside here. So, well, now we have our fender, and now we can take and mark to trim up our inner fender, because we're going to reuse this, but because we're coming back here, you lose your attachment points, so we're going to need to take off some of it. So I'll get to figuring out where I want to cut on it. Okay, now that I have my outer fender separate from my inner fender, I'm just going to take my inner fender and just basically on top of this mounting bracket, I'm just going to take it and basically just kind of set it up in place where it goes, just so I can kind of get a feel for where I need to trim. So what I'm thinking I'll do is this inside, this first ridge, I'll take that off, and then take this, these 2 pieces off, and that will have everything tucked underneath where the fender itself is going to show. And then for this back side, because I'm keeping so much of my width, I'm not going to have to trim a whole lot as far as but I'm going to have to bring it in some a little bit, so that shouldn't be too bad of a job. So we will get started with our cuts. I just want to mention, for the inner fender, I'm going to use my trusty jigsaw. This being inner fender, is going to be hidden. The plastic's thicker than your outer fender skin, but this is not going to ever be seen, so we're not quite as worried about it being pretty. So let's start chopping. Well, folks, I believe that should be enough. Now I'll just be getting everything put back together, cleaning up my cut on my outer fender, and just buttoning things up, and then this side will be done. Okay, so we're back again. We've got our fender chopped, or our inner fender chopped down to the appropriate size. It should work out fine. So what we're going to do is get our 5 bolts put back in, and then we will clean up the rough edges on our outer fender. But bring it in closer. You have a bolt here, a bolt here, bolt here, a bolt here, and then that hidden bolt, I believe it went right up. Yep, I believe it was this one right here, this little hole. So we'll get these bolts, we'll get the 10mm bolts put back in, and then we'll clean up our edge. Okay, we got our 5 bolts put in. Now, after you get your 5 bolts put in, depending on how you trim your inner fender, or your fender liner, you may have to do a little bit of creative ingenuity to make sure everything is nice and snug and not flopping around. So right here at the corner is really the only spot that was loose on it, where I trimmed it back. So basically what I've done is I've took a 3/16 drill bit and I've put a little hole through the plastic of the inner fender. Oops, wrong way. So let me back out. We'll bring you up close. So I've came probably about 1 inch back, drilled me a 3/16 hole, ran my cable tie or zip tie through it, back around to here, and then just pull everything up snug, and then now we'll snip the excess off, and we're ready to pop the fender on. Okay, before we put the fender on, let's go ahead and clean up our edges. I know I said we'd put the fender on, but I figured it's probably easier to do this off the vehicle. So just pocket knife, and what we're going to do is just kind of where it's melted, more or less. Which, I mean, most of this you can just about get off with just, run your hand across it. But just all the ugly melty places, you just kind of want to scrape it off. And this is mainly just so that way we can get our trim over it without having too much issues or hassles. Okay, so I had a few technical difficulties. Probably a good idea to put your outer fender on before you put your inner fender in, because up here at the front, your inner fender actually goes. Or this here actually get your outer fender that you're cutting actually kind of gets sandwiched between the body of the Jeep and your inner fender. So now we're ready for the finishing touches, which is our edge molding. This is door trim. I'm gonna buy it at auto parts store in I think like an 18-foot roll. It's got a slit in the side of it, and it's got, you know, glue in it. So it's real easy, real simple. You get it started, and then you just keep working it onto the Jeep as you go. Which, it helps if it's nice and warm. I just kind of laid this out in the sun for a minute, and it's real easy to work with. Where it does have self-adhesive glue into it, you know, probably don't want to do this, you know, when it's freezing cold out, because it's probably not going to want to stick. There it goes. But once you get the trim started, in theory it should go fairly easily. Okay, so to finish up the install, I ended up going to Lowe's and purchasing two what's called elevator bolts. These are 5/16 by 18 by 1.5. I would honestly recommend getting the 1 inch and not the 1.5. I bought a little longer than I thought I needed, just to make sure that, you know, I can always cut excess off, but I can't make the bolt longer. So 1 inch would have been right at perfect, because I ended up cutting that extra 1/2 inch off. But basically, I'm to solid up the front of the fender, since it's not the only thing holding it is just your plastic clips, and it's no longer attached at the front. Your outer fender is no longer attached to your inner fender. Basically what I've done is I took a 5/16 drill bit and just kind of lined it up. You have a flat spot on your inner fender underneath, and I basically just kind of lined it up and drilled through both, set my bolt through, and then I put a I went ahead and bought the Teflon lock nuts. So I ended up needing a 13mm deep well socket and an 8mm wrench to kind of up underneath here to hold that in place. Once you get your Teflon lock nut run up, your this here is square underneath, and it'll pull into the plastic, and once you get it pulled down, it'll hold itself in place to finish tightening it up. So I just wanted to get that, but I've got that done on both of them, and you can see they're pretty well even side to side. Again, with the zip tie in the back just to hold this into place. As you can see, that zip tie, holds everything good. So that'll wrap up the install, or the front, and we'll move on to the back.